Hey everybody, how you doing? It's me again, Truth Teacher, coming at you with a new video discussing this whole controversy around hip-hop. Who created it? Who's responsible? Blah, 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 blah. Basically challenging propaganda being put out by a certain group of people who go by a three-letter name, who are not to be by any way, shape, or form conflated with the larger African American community. And I know some people take offense to me saying that, but I have to take a look at the behavior of the overwhelming majority of people who identify by this name and judge according to the character that they display, the things that they say, the kind of energy that they put out. And in my estimation, this is a group of people who have shown themselves at every turn to be purveyors of racism and hate speech. And as such, I don't think it's fair to lump all African Americans in the same bag with this group of people. So while these people are of the lineage of African Americans who are the descendants of the first wave of enslaved Africans that were brought to these shores that we now call the United States, all African Americans do not belong to this group, nor do they ascribe to this group's ideology, which is basically racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant. What can I say? They show us who they are at every turn. It just is what it is. But I've been having, people have been coming at me under the video that I released the last time, as usual. And also under other videos that I support, other channels that I support, in particular, Dr. Cologne, his hip hop history channel. People are accusing me of having some kind of hatred against the African American community, which is ridiculous because, especially for those of you who have been following me for a while, shout out to you, because I've not been consistent at all in any way, shape, or form with putting out content on my channel. But if you've been with me since at least 2020, let's put it that way, you know that I've been consistently a voice for defending the African American community against anyone looking to slander them. So the content on my channel speaks for itself. But at the same time, something in this life experience, you live and you learn, right? You learn by experiences. And if you're smart, you evolve and you become a better person. And if not, you stay stuck in your own little bubble. What I've come to realize is that I have to move away. I had to move away from racialized thinking. You know, I grew up primarily in the 70s. I was born in the late 60s and raised in the 70s. And the mindset that we were raised with, right, was that all the troubles in the world were responsible or initiated by one group of people with a particular skin tone. And they were the source of all evil. And, you know, we've kind of been indoctrinated to think that there was something inherently evil about them. And what I've come to realize, and particularly in the last few years, is that there's no such thing as any group of people who are inherently one thing or the other. I've had to abandon my ideas of race, color, ethnicity, and what those things mean, and the very nature of what it means to be human, right? And the conclusion that I've come to is that at the end of the day, we're all exactly that. We're all just human beings. We get distracted by peripheral things. We get distracted by skin color. We get distracted by racial definitions. We get distracted by economic status. We get distracted from all of these things, which blind our eyes from realizing that fundamentally we're all the same. We all have the same capacities for greatness, for intelligence, but at the same time we all have the same capacity for evil. And what is evil? Evil is making the decision to behave in certain ways that are how do you want to say, not conducive to health and well-being of other human beings or other life forms on the planet that we share, we share this world with. It's making a conscious decision to do harmful things to other entities, whether they be other human beings or other, like I said, other life forms. We're all capable of doing this. Now, because of certain historical events and circumstances, certain groups in certain areas have had the capacity to do more harm than other people. But it doesn't negate the fact that every last single one of us are capable of doing the exact same thing. And had we been in the circumstances that allowed us to have access to power, most likely we would have behaved the same way, because there's no such thing as moral superiority by group. It all depends on the individual and the contents of their character. It doesn't even have anything to do with what religion a person ascribes to or not. There are people of every religion who have committed and are committing atrocities in one form or another. So it has nothing to do with religion. You can't say, oh, well, Christians this, oh, well, Jews that, oh, well, Muslims that. No, it has nothing to do with your religion. Because in every single religion, we see basically the same message, which is to live a righteous life, to do good, to treat people the way that you would want to be treated, to have a value for justice. And you see people in every religion who violate the basic core tenets of their tradition. For one reason or another, they find some way of convincing themselves as to why what they're doing is permissible. You know, perfect example is the dynamic that most of us are caught in, and you know, this whole situation of racial prejudice. You know, we had a group of people who just happened to be Christians, and although the gospel teaches us to treat people humanely and to treat people from a place of love, for this group of people, all of that went out the window when confronted with the opportunity to amass great power and wealth at the expense of other groups of people. And the way they convinced themselves that what they were doing was to come up with this whole paradigm of racial classifications and then ascribing character traits to a large group of people based on those physical character traits or their ancestral affiliation, ancestral descent from certain groups of people, right? Actually, if you take a step back, they made a step away from the true spirit of Christianity before they even met, you know, so-called people of color, Africans and Native Americans, right? They started doing it when they made distinctions within their own countries between people who had economic wealth and those who didn't, right? They made a distinction between the aristocracy and the common people. They exploited the common people for their own benefit. And even though they claim to follow the gospel, right, which is based on principles of justice and humanitarian moral behavior, they came up with ideas to justify why it was okay to exploit other people and have them living in complete squalor while they lived high on the hog from the labor and the resources that they took from these people, right? So this is where you get the whole aristocracy in Europe and the idea of divine right. We have the money, we have the power, we have the privilege because God ordained it to be so. So if you're poor, it's not my fault that you're poor. God is the one that ordained that. And because God ordained it, well, it's okay for me to exploit you economically, socially. So racism was just an upgrade from that basic mentality. And we can see the same dynamic going on with people who are Muslims, people who are Jews, people who are Hindus. All of these people have in common the fact that, number one, they're humans, and number two, they've betrayed the very spirit of their traditions by finding ways of justifying why it's okay for them to discriminate and oppress vulnerable groups of people. And there's some who would just want to make a knee-jerk reaction and say, well, people who are rich are automatically, defective morally, which isn't true. They're just people. Remember what I said. We're all just human, and we all have the same capacity for doing good or evil. And the choices that we make are based on the level of our character, how elevated we are in our thinking. Perfect example. Look at what happened in the 80s with the crack epidemic. Now, we can all talk about the fact that we ourselves didn't bring drugs into the community. That was brought in by outsiders. That's absolutely true. We know now for certain that certain governmental agencies like the FBI were responsible for bringing crack cocaine into our communities. But here's the kicker. Did anybody put a gun to anybody's head to sell poison to their own community? No. Those were decisions that were made by people who saw an opportunity to get rich quick, and they didn't care that it was happening at the expense of other people's lives. They didn't care that families were being destroyed. They didn't care. They didn't care whose lives were destroyed. And so those of us in the community, we were stuck between a rock and a hard place because, number one, we were caught between the drug addicts who would go out and commit all kinds of crimes in order to get the money so that they could buy their drugs. And we were caught between the drug dealers who would kill each other in order to gain territory, right? Turf. And a lot of times, they wouldn't just kill the people that they had, disagreements with, but they would kill people, just innocent bystanders. Why? Because they didn't want any witnesses. Not to mention all the innocent bystanders who got killed by stray bullets. But they didn't care. As long as they were able to get some money and some power quickly, that's all that mattered. So let me ask you, what's the difference between that kind of mentality and the mentality of a slave trader? Basically, isn't it the same thing? you're willing to destroy and exploit another human life in order to gain economic advantages. Isn't that the same thing? You're willing to commit murder so that you can more easily put more dollar bills in your pocket. So how are you different? How are those people in the hood different than the European colonizers that enslaved our ancestors? How is it different? It's not different. It's all the same. It's just a matter of magnitude, and the magnitude is dependent on how much opportunity you had to exercise your will. So we see the same dynamic playing out on a micro level and a macro level, but it's the same dynamic. It's just a matter of magnitude. So with regards to the African American community in this country, it's undeniable that African Americans have been subjected historically and even presently to a great deal of exploitation and oppression. By the dominant society who categorizes themselves as white. Those are all facts. Side note, we see the same dynamic happening on a world stage right now, playing out in Gaza. Now, wherever you stand on that issue, one thing is undeniable. Innocent men, women, children, elderly, handicapped, newborn, have been massacred by a relentless campaign of indiscriminate bombings. And the ones who are perpetuating this travesty are people who have a history of genocide themselves. They experienced a genocide in Europe. In the 20th century. In Germany, in Poland, in Ukraine. At the hands of the Nazis. And so Nazi has become the epitome of evil. But you see, the mistake that people made is they put it on, oh, it's those people. Those people are evil. Those people are inhumane. Those people are savages. Not realizing that each and every one of us carries the same evil within ourselves. And so now we see happening right in front of our eyes the slaughter of tens of thousands of innocent people, and there's no foreseeable end in sight or viable solution on the table as to how we stop this from happening. So bringing it back to the African American community now. We all know, because we see what's happening, what continues to happen. But the mistake that a lot of us are making is we're fooling ourselves into thinking that just because a person belongs to a group or a community that's been oppressed or is experiencing oppression, that somehow or another they're immune to doing the same thing to someone else. And this group of people who identify with this three-letter name on a daily basis all across social media are demonstrating that they're capable of the same kind of evil that's been perpetuated against them. They don't have the wherewithal to go up against the larger white community, but what they've done is they've taken a book out of the page of white nationalism and they're using it against quote unquote other people of color. In particular, people from the Caribbean, whether it be English, Spanish, or French speaking people from the Caribbean and Latin America, and people from the African continent itself. Top on their list are Jamaicans and Puerto Ricans. And they're using this issue, this question of hip hop, as a vehicle, a springboard to vent their hatred and their xenophobia and their vitriol. These are people that are not, the overwhelming majority of these people are not practitioners of that subculture. They don't rap, they don't DJ, they don't dance, they don't write. They're nothing more, if they're involved with hip hop at all, they're just consumers. That's it. All they do is consume content, particularly rap music, and they think that because they listen to rap music and they got black skin that makes them hip hop. No, it don't. That doesn't make you hip hop. Hip hop makes you, what makes you hip hop is if you're actively involved in participating in that culture, and the overwhelming majority of people in the world are not involved in it. They're just spectators. It's our culture. It's our culture. I can see how someone could think that, but then I can also see the other side of that and say, no, the fuck it's not. Because if we look at all the different elements that make up hip-hop, the writing, the dancing, right? And there's specific dances we're talking about when we talk about hip-hop, right? DJing, MCing, rapping. When you go to your family reunion in North Carolina, South Carolina, or Georgia, is your grandmother spinning on her back? Is your mother, you know, the whole family gets together in a cipher and you all are like spitting rhymes off the top of your head? No? Are you doing graffiti pieces? No? Then it's not your culture. Culture is what you do every day of your life. Culture is something that is lived, that's participated in. Okay? So what could we say is African American culture? We could say gospel music, because that's something you do every Sunday if you go to church. You participate in that. That's your culture. We could say the way the elderly mothers of the church dress, There's a certain style that they have, certain conventions that they have. That's culture. That's something that they live. They do it every day or every week. You have the tradition of having a cookout. That's something that you do in your community with your family. That's culture. When a family member passes on after the funeral, you come together and you have, a meal. That's culture. All these different things that you do, that you actively participate in, that's culture. Hip hop is a subculture, a youth subculture that's participated in by people who actively engage in it. And that's a very small number of people. Okay? But nevertheless, the subculture does have a beginning, does have an origin story, and that origin was in the Bronx and New York City from the time of the 70s. In particular, the mid 70s to the late 70s is really the time period when everything in all these different elements was really cooking, and it was an explosion of creativity. And that area was multi-ethnic. The primary population was built, the majority was made up of African Americans who were categorized as black, and within the quote-unquote black population is a subset, at least a quarter, if not more, are people who are coming directly, their origins are directly from the Caribbean, or they have some degree of West Indian ancestry. And then, of course, we have the Spanish-speaking people, primarily Puerto Ricans, but there were also significant numbers of Dominicans and Cubans. Not too many Central Americans at that time. So Mexicans and Central Americans at that time, no, they started coming later on in the 80s. By that time, hip-hop was already, this thing had already been given the name hip-hop, and it was already solidified. But the people responsible for this whole new movement, it was multi-ethnic. And there's just no arguing about that fact. Okay, the founders, the founding DJ, whether you like it or not, was DJ Kool Herc. And there's no getting around that. He was a Jamaican, born and raised in Jamaica, and then came here to the United States. Oh, well, he was participating in black culture. I could see how you could say that. And then once again, I can see the flip side to that argument and say he was participating in American culture, or he was participating in Bronx culture. Whichever perspective you want to adopt, I can see a point for it. But the fact still remains, at the end of the day, no doubt about it, within that culture that he assimilated into when he came to the United States, he did something that had not been done before. He took the convention of DJing and he did something He did something completely different with it. He forever changed the way DJs operated, the format, and that would give rise to a whole new movement. And right on his heels was another West Indian who was of Bayesian origin. His family was from Barbados. I don't know if he was actually born in Barbados or if he was born here in the United States by Bayesian parents. And the name is Bayesian, not Barbasian. Okay. That's the way you say it. It's Bayesian. But he did something that not only revolutionized this musical expression or the aspect of the musical expression, but he did something that influenced DJ technique all over the world, no matter which genre. Okay? He created the slip plate that keeps the LP from sliding when you put it on the turntable. If he had patented that invention, I'm telling you, the man would be a billionaire today, because every DJ in the world uses that device. He came up with a method of extending breaks, the break beats in records, and different segments of the record, which he called the quick mix theory, which was genius. Between that and his invention, this West Indian DJ did something that no other DJ in the history of the world ever did, and that was to take the turntables and turn them into an instrument themselves. What he did made scratching possible, because without that there would be no scratching. What he did made rapping as we know it possible to evolve to what it's become, because the DJ at that point was able to set down a steady rhythm, steady beat that allowed the MCs to be able to come up with their rhymes. Then we have Africa Bambaataa, half Jamaican, half Bayesian. And he's the one that not only codifies all of the elements in this movement, but he gave it the name, hip-hop. Now, you may argue, oh, he got that from African Americans. Well, last time I checked, we're all speaking English, right? Did English come from Africa? Did the English language come from those of you, we was already here, we're Native Americans? Is English a Native American language? Last time I checked, no. So if you want to claim ownership of words in the English language, then if you want to follow that logic, then the credit for your slang has to go back to Europeans. I'm just saying. What's the most used word in African American dialect? Ain't. Is ain't a black word? It's used by African Americans, but do you know the origins of that word, ain't? It doesn't come from Africa. Where it comes from is Scotland and Ireland. That's where it comes from. Africans who came here to what would become the United States, they assimilated the language from the people that were already here, who were coming from Ireland, England, Scotland. And that's how these terms find their way into African American speech. You know, we talk about the jams. Jam! That's American, that's African American slang. That came from us. No, it didn't. Jam is an abbreviation of the word jamboree, French, which means a party. So, by bringing all of this out, am I like trying to diss African Americans? No, what I'm trying to point out to you is that culture is not static, nor does it exist in a vacuum. We're all being influenced by each other. We're all taking influences and inspirations from each other, and we're remaking them, we're recycling them to make something new. As the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. All that we're doing on this planet as human beings is we're taking old knowledge, old traditions, old habits, we recycle them, we come up with something new, and in some cases it gives us an inspiration, and we come up with something, a completely new invention, but it got sparked off by an idea from something else and somewhere else or someone else. So at the end of the day, we all need each other in order to survive. That's how civilizations grow. And the civilizations who have been the strongest and the most dynamic have been those who were in a matrix where they were functioning with other groups of people, bringing in different materials, different ideas, different ways of doing things. And the ones who are not as advanced in certain ways are the ones who existed mainly in isolation. That's just a fact. Okay? So, under one of the videos, somebody said to me, you know, some nonsense about what musical genius has Caribbean people or Latin people given to the world. You see, this is why I have to emphasize that this three-letter group of people is a hate group. Because how could you fix your mouth to say something so stupid? Everybody has contributed something. There are people with intelligence in every single community, and we have all contributed to the world as we know it right now. Life as we know it would not be the same without the input of all these different people around the world and what they had to offer. We wouldn't even be in this country right now if it hadn't been for the fact that the Native American people who were here first showed those Europeans how to farm. Because they didn't know how. They didn't come from a farming background. That's why you look at the stories, they were freaking dying. Until the Native Americans showed them, this is corn, this is how you plant it. These are pumpkins. This is how you plant that. These are beans. This is how you cultivate that. It was because of those Native Americans. You want to know how the Europeans really got a foothold in New England? It wasn't because they came with superior knowledge and technology or none of that bullshit. They learned agriculture from the Native Americans using the plants that were native to the area, right? Because things like wheat that they were used to planting back in Europe didn't really take to the climate that was here on the East Coast in New England. So it was because of the knowledge they got from them, that they even knew how to cultivate. Second of all, in order for you to have a farm, it's not an easy thing because you have to prepare the soil. You got to dig it up and prepare it, which means getting rid of all the boulders and the stones and all of that so that you can have fertile soil to work with. Every town in New England or anywhere else in the United States that you go and it has the name Field in it, that was founded on a Native American village that had been depopulated because of epidemic diseases that hit those people because they didn't have the immunity to European diseases. So when those people died out, those villages died out, who came in? The Europeans. That's the real way. New England, you know, the whole story of the Mayflower, the reason why they were able to come in at the time that they did, because they were fishing off the coast for a long time before the Mayflower. But they knew that this place was inhabited. They were interacting with the natives. But it was such a heavy population, they were not able to colonize it. Too many people. It wasn't until they had an epidemic and that population was wiped out that they saw, wow, nobody's there anymore. Now we can move in. And that's how Plymouth Rock, that's how Plymouth was settled. That was a village that belonged to the Patuxet people. I mean, the Pequots. So without that interaction, none of us would be having this conversation because the Europeans would not have been able to have gotten a foothold on the East Coast. There would have been no colonies and there would be no United States. There would have been no African slave trade. There would have been no talk of African vernacular English. None of that shit would have existed. So no matter how you want to slice this cake about who got what from what, if you trace it back, everybody got something from somebody else. So whether you like it or not, people from the Caribbean and Latin America have been a part of this country for well over 100 years, if not even more. And we have contributed to this society in many different ways. Hip-hop is just one small way, one small example of what we have helped to create in this country. Well, I could go on more, but this is almost an hour and I don't want to go that long. So I'm going to see you all later on the next one, okay? Peace out.